So today is the last day of this FDP program. And on the first session of the last day, we are very fortunate to have Dr. Ramakrishnan, design thinker and coach in the School of Thinking. Today, his topic is going to be design thinking approach in learning. So we welcome you to this program, and I hope that we will have a very wonderful interaction here. And before I give the time over to you, I would like to say a few words about our speaker for today's sessions. So as I've mentioned before, today's sessions, we will have a talk from Dr. Ramakrishnan R, design thinker and coach. Content first, communication foremost. That is how Dr. Ramakrishnan R visualized his profile as a faculty in the School of Design Thinking. Be it ideating the curriculum of a credit course or the outcome of a webinar or hosting virtual session for faculty and students of various academic institutions. He is fascinated by the multiple dimensions of human interaction and communication. Dr. Ramakrishnan was introduced to the concept of design thinking during his earlier stint with Polaris and later Intellect. Smitten by the immense potential that this could bring about to any human endeavor, he volunteered to associate with Intellect's design thinking initiative, such as orchestrating and anchoring walkthrough at Intellect's unique design center. Today, as a faculty, he also authors blogs, various workshop collaterals and tools, and senior management communication. Sir has varied experience spanning from journalism to market research to corporate communication and marketing. The connecting thread being content and communication. Starting his journalist with the New Indian Express, he has experience in strategizing communication and content for various purposes: media, corporate communication, brand and marketing, and learning. He is also deeply interested in technological innovation, especially in areas of military technology, and has published global reports when he was a senior researcher covering military market development in Europe and Asia. On the academic front, Sir holds a first-class master's degree and a doctoral degree in defense and strategic studies from the University of Madras. He also holds PG diploma in journalism and mass communication. He has published over 17 papers in peer-reviewed journals and books, and has presented papers in national and international seminars. He also effectively offers guest lectures at the University of Madras and for the Tamil Nadu Police. Sir is currently involved in the School of Design Thinking as a faculty member, and he is also the Assistant Vice President in Intellect Design Arena. We are very fortunate to have you, sir, and the time is over to you. It's over to you, and I hope we will have a fruitful interaction. Welcome to you, sir. Thank you so much for being a part of this ATAL program. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. It was very nice of you for those kind words. Let me begin without much ado, and first let me share my screen. Yes, please let me know if you can see my screen now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a nice sunny morning here in Chennai after 2 intense days of rains. Our monsoon period has just begun, and we have some interesting statistics already. So we hope there are more rains in Chennai, but for now it's bright and sunny outside, and this topic is equally sunny and interesting. What I'm going to talk today is actually the fundamentals of design thinking. Or if you actually say it is a step before design thinking. If you see the title screen here, you might think there's a typo, right? There's a typographical mistake in the title of the slide. So it says design the thinking. It's not design thinking as such, right? The fundamental reason why we emphasize, or why I would like to emphasize on this topic today, is because when we say design thinking, many a times people assume it's the usage of tools, it's adherence to certain processes and methodologies, you know, those kind of things. It's another process like like the many other traditional thinking processes that we have. But we often tend to forget that there is one extremely important tool that is fundamental to anything that we do, which is the human mind, right? Unless a person is taught or trained to be a design thinker, it is impossible for them to be so. Almost like in every other profession, like if you're a doctor, you have to have the mindset of a doctor to actually be a surgeon. If you're a teacher, like all of you are, right? You need to have that mindset. Not everybody can be a teacher. So this particular session is about preparing the design. And I would like to start this session with a very small story. It's actually a very popular case study published by Harvard Business Review. For me, I consider it more as a story because it has a lot of sentiments and values to it. So what is the story about? Nepal, as we know, is largely a rural country in the Himalayan region. And a couple of years ago, they found out that they've been plagued with a certain problem. When premature children are born in hospitals in Nepal, they found out a very alarming statistic or alarming rate of these children do not, exist to see more than a few days or weeks, right? They tend to die very early, very prematurely. So obviously, when the government, when the medical leadership got together, they assume that the problem is because they don't have good incubators, right? So what we tend to do is when there's a premature child, we put the child in the incubator for a certain number of days or weeks as the requirement may be. So that being said, there were a lot of people who are willing to sponsor incubators. There were a lot of social organizations which gave money, which donated incubators and all that. And they assumed that okay, this rate will come down. Unfortunately, it did not seem to be that way. Well, a lot of people were working on this. There were some students from Harvard University which also had visited Nepal to study this from their own perspective. And when they did that, they found a certain pattern that the government missed, that the medical authorities themselves missed. And the interesting fact was that these children actually did not die in the hospital, as reports had indicated, data had indicated. And these children many of them had actually died on the way to the hospital. As I just said, Nepal is largely a rural country, much like India, right? So when these children are brought from their rural homes to the hospital for medical care, somehow the children did not seem to survive that trip. So that changed the entire paradigm of the question, right? The model of the question itself changes. Okay, so is it a problem with the incubator? What could be the problem? They did a lot of research and they found out many things which are very, very necessary. They observed, they listened, they discussed with people. And they found out certain very, very important clues. Like they were thinking like typical detectives. What were these? One is lack of literacy, right? So parents themselves do not know what needs to be done when a child is born premature. Second thing is the roads, the electricity, and the other infrastructure tends to be poor. Like India, Nepal is also a developing economy, right? So they're trying. The government does its best, but there is still a lot of gap to be filled. The roads were bad. Transportation was an issue. And so when they consider all these very, very critical questions, they came up with a very interesting solution. And the solution is very simple. It was basically something like a hot bag, a backpack, which had certain plates that you could heat, which could hold the temperature of that particular environment of the bag as required as in an incubator for a couple of hours together till the child actually reached the hospital. And this was applicable for two basic reasons. One, it was extremely cost effective. It was not expensive at all. Two, it helped in the movement or in the logistics of the child, since it's a bag that can be worn as well as carried in the hand. And it didn't require electricity, right? It was basically hot plates that you immerse in hot water for quite some time, and then you fit it into the bag, and the bag tends to retain the heat, right? The correct amount of heat required for the child to sustain the trip till it reaches the hospital. And this was a wonderful solution that caught up. It caught the fancy of the government. It caught the fancy of a lot of NGO societal organizations. And today this is being heralded as a wonderful case study of design thinking. Right? For me, this is an awesome case because it talks of sentiments, it talks of emotion. Most important of all, it talks of empathy, right? Which is the fundamental virtue of design thinking. Now, that being said, you would have heard that I mentioned certain very important statements. One second. Right? There were three elements that I had mentioned in this particular story that these students from Harvard were able to do. The first important thing that they did is that they listened, right? When we say design thinking is all about the person you're trying to help, right? It's not about just reaching out to the market. It's about solving a problem. It's about creating a product, offering a service, right? And it's the fundamental requirement of this is to actually listen. Now, we all might consider or all might think that, yeah, we listen, you're all listening to me, right? So what's so great about that? Statistics again reveal, research reveals that most often than not, we tend to hear. And that's very common, right? Because let's take into consideration this audience here, right? We have faculty, teaching faculty, and we have research scholars. There's so much of information in our head, so much knowledge in our head, right? That when we tend to hear somebody, there's always some amount of referencing that goes in the back of our mind. Is this person on screen, is Ram who's speaking right now on the screen saying something that I understand? Is he saying something that I agree with? Or is he saying something totally on the contrary that doesn't kind of fit into my scheme of belief, right? So there's always this reference. So we most often tend not tend to hear what a person actually says. We don't tend to listen to them. Often when I discuss this with my students, with people that I speak to, I'm reminded of this very interesting story of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. A very interesting story, and I would like to share it here, just a minute or two. It seems that during the initial days of Shivaji, the young Shivaji, when he was, taking on the Mughal Empire, he was kind of losing a lot of his soldiers, right, in battle, and he was not being pretty effective. At that point in time, during one particular campaign, he and a couple of his friends, they lost their way. They went into a forest or some area which was totally new to them. They see a hut in a distance, and they approach the hut with the request of some food because they're all hungry and they weren't having food with them. The hut was populated by an old lady. She assumed that these young men before her were soldiers of Shivaji. She didn't kind of recognize Shivaji himself. She gave them honor, asked them to sit down and said, wait, let me prepare some khichdi for you. She prepared very piping hot khichdi, served them on the plates or on the leaf. And Shivaji, in his immense hunger and haste, dipped his fingers right at the center. And since it was very hot, he immediately drew out his hand and in the process spilled some rice, some khichdi onto the floor. And this woman made a very interesting statement. She said, sir, you seem to be a bit hasty like your master. You should have started eating food from the periphery of your plate, where food tends to be cooler first, and then work your way in. Just much like your master, Emperor Shivaji, the King Shivaji. Right? Shivaji, in his haste, probably was trying to take the stronger forts without annexing the forts at the periphery, which were easier to conquer. Shivaji immediately connected the dots. The actual situation was food on his plate, but he was able to connect the dots and take it to the forts that he's planning to conquer. So what was actually happening in the king's mind was he was listening to her, right? Keeping everything in context. Let us move on to the next very important aspect of it, which is dialoguing. Many times when we are in a discussion with our colleagues, with our friends, when it comes to official work or personal matters, or even things like the weather or politics or sports, right? We tend to have a debate. Who is better, right? What is better? Are you right? Am I right? Right? It's always like these debates that we have in schools and colleges, right? Like who's giving the right point, who's the winner, and so on. But when you think about this from the larger context of design thinking, right? Where you want to add value to what you do, it's not always about the debate or who is right. It's always about dialoguing and discussing what is right for that person. So instead of the ego, the attitude of whether my idea is correct vis-a-vis your idea, the approach should rather be what should be the correct idea? What are all ideas that can be considered, right? So the second very critical aspect of design thinking is dialogue. And the third aspect is observation. What did those students from Harvard University do in Nepal, apart from listening and dialogue? They observed. They found that these children in hospitals didn't actually die in the hospital. They died en route to the hospital. And this is very important because observation, most often than not, tends to fill gaps that the people that whom you're speaking to are not themselves able to put across. What it basically does, it helps you to uncover certain blind spots. Why do I say this? Because when you're speaking to a person who probably has a problem, right? Or you are trying to design a product or a solution, there are certain things that people tell you because they are aware of them. They know them. But many times people are not aware of certain problems. For example, consider the medical field, right? A person comes to you and says, sir, I have fever. And I have fever for the past 2 or 3 days. Now, is fever itself a problem? People say it's more of the symptom. That's a deeper problem, right? Unless you observe what a person says and what a person does not say, it's very difficult to fathom truly what the requirements could be. So the third most critical element of design thinking, or rather the fundamentals of design thinking, is observation. So LDO, listening, dialogue, and observation. These three are critical when it comes to design thinking. Now, that being said, what is design in the first place? Can anybody switch on their mic and probably share their thoughts as to what they think could be a design, or what incorporates design? Anybody? We have a lot of faculty and research scholars here, so I would love to hear your opinions as well.
Sir, you are asking for a general definition of a design?
Anything that comes to your mind. What do you think could be a design?
A framework.
Wonderful.
It is a roadmap, a non-verbal roadmap to convey.
Okay. A roadmap, a framework.
It is trying to understand that what are the components of the product,
What are the
important components.
Wonderful.
Outline.
It is the
Outline.
It is the logic in which we are thinking, the way we are looking at things. The logic,
the way we think. Wonderful. Good.
Sir,
Sir, it's a planned framework.
Planned framework. Very nice. Very
sir,
nice.
a pathway showing the cause and effect relationship between the different components, sir.
Cause and effect. Yes. Of components. Okay. Good.
Problem solving.
Sure, definitely an approach to solve a problem could be a good design. True. What all of you are putting together, very, very good points, which have key components of design thinking. So if you, or rather of design, as we're talking here. So if you want to have one comprehensive idea of design, it actually incorporates all that you said. Let's look at the following slide. So design, as one of you said, is a process, right, of working to develop solutions in a very conscious, you said planned. So true, it's conscious and an innovative way. So it is something new in which both functional and aesthetic requirements are included based on the user's need. So there are 5 critical aspects here. There's a conscious way, it is an innovative way, there is both functional and aesthetic. So this kind of would bring into your mind that very popular quote of Steve Jobs, right? Design is not how a product actually looks, but it's more of how a product actually works. So there is the functionality and there's the aesthetics. And ultimately, there should be a need, a requirement, a necessity for that. Otherwise, well, what is the purpose of a particular product or a service or a solution? Right? So these 5 aspects are key to having a design. So what are the examples of great design? What do you think are examples of great design? You live in a wonderful city, around a wonderful city. In fact, in a great country which has a lot of examples of great design. Any examples that you can think of? 2 or 3. Can anybody say what a great design is? Anything that comes to your mind. It can be simple as
it's proper and all the important things are mentioned.
Okay. All right. Can you give me an example?
We are talking about man-made great designs.
Anything, ma'am. Anything.
Nature, flower, leaves.
Helicopters.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
Actually, design thinking is about meeting user needs and functionality. So I think any of these innovations like a zip or a microwave, these are all examples of successful design.
Absolutely, sir.
A great design to my mind is a rhythmic pattern.
Wonderful, sir. Wonderful. Rhythmic pattern. Very nice.
The great design means highly efficient, highly effective, with minimum losses.
Highly effective, highly efficient, minimum loss. Very nice, sir.
Sir, for example, the Japanese bullet train, where they use the biomimicry.
Wonderful example. Wonderful, wonderful. Inspiration from nature. Brilliant, brilliant.
3D printing.
Yes, definitely. 3D printing. So you from what I hear from all of you, I mean, there is no dirt of a great design. Sir, yes.
Sir, some of the most prominent river dams in India and temples, most of the ancient temples in India, so even including Taj Mahal, like that Taj Mahal's many temples, they're all great design examples of great designs.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we are in such a rich country that there's no dirt for wonderful design, whether it's natural or man-made, right? Now, that being said, let me show you a few examples that we use almost in our day-to-day life. The safety pin. So ubiquitous, so it is so popular, it is so much in front of our eyes that we often fail to see it, right? For the design that it is. It was said to have been invented over 170 years ago by a very popular inventor in England. I'm sorry, I kind of skip his name right now. But the design has not changed much. It's fundamentally the same. The only change that you'll probably see is the material in which the safety pin is made. Sometimes it could be made of some good quality plastic. It comes in different colors. There could be a safety cap over the cap that you see, especially when used in children's diapers and all that. It can be modified slightly to, fit a badge to your shirt, right? Or to your jacket. That's it. But basically the purpose of this wonderful small tool, this tiny machine, is the same thing. It basically helps to keep two pieces of fabric together. And it hasn't changed over a century and a half. It's by and large the same. So that's from a product perspective. Let us look at it from a service perspective, something that we are all very proud of as Indians. The humble Mumbai Dabbawalas, right? I mean, these are the people who probably haven't crossed high school. The average education that they have, the qualification they have is about 8th to 10th standard, right? I don't think anybody or very few of them would have even entered college. But the perfection in which they deliver their goods, right? The dabbas from the home to the office and from office back to home, safely and securely is anybody's wonderment, right? Harvard University again has done case study about them. I mean, these people have been invited to England and where not to give lectures and discourses of how they do this. And then they execute it is simplicity itself. All that they use is some pattern, some triangle, square, circle, alphanumeric code, and a color code. That's it. Keeping in mind that these people, these logistic experts, right, are hardly beyond school. Most of them very young people. That being said, I mean, the system in which they deliver their dabbas is perfect. I mean, there are stories in which people have sent their monthly salaries in dabbas. So the breadwinner in office gets his salary, keeps it in the dabba, sends it home. Many times they send their cinema tickets to their wives during their wedding anniversaries and so on, right? A pleasant surprise when the woman at home opens the dabba. Yes, of course, there might be one or two slippages here and there, due to which we have this wonderful movie called Tiffin Box. But that being said, that's a really negligible minority, right? Hardly few. So this is one brilliant example of design thinking in action as a service. So not all designs are good, right? Some designs that we do also tend to be bad because we don't actually look or observe into the entire landscape of things. Here is a very good example of the footover bridge that we see in many railway stations across the country. This is an example of a bad design because if you have footover bridges, right, why do we have railroad accidents, right? People being knocked down by trains because they were ignorant while crossing the track. On one side, you will say, yes, people are not disciplined enough. On the other side, you might say it's largely the individual's problem, right? It's not a systemic problem. But then when you design something, shouldn't you consider the entire environment as well as the user's mindset? That there will be people who are disciplined, who will get on the bridge and get off the bridge, but there will also be those few people who will want to take the shortcut, much against government rules, right? Secondly, if you are in such a crowd over here, right? Sorry, right? And there are multiple platforms that you have to get down on, right? Suppose you have to get on platform number 6. In such a crowd, how will you identify which staircase leads down to platform number 6, especially when you're in a hurry, right? These are certain things that the government can, probably keep in mind. So in terms of a design aspect in its totality, probably there's a large scope for improvement. And that being said, I mean, I was in Delhi 2 years ago when I was at this bridge called the Minto Bridge. I think this is somewhere near DDU Marg and Swami Vivekanand Marg, come somewhere around there. One of the biggest problems of this bridge that I have heard and read in papers is that during monsoon, it almost always gets inundated, right? The passage underneath is flooded with rainwater. Unfortunately, I believe this is a heritage monument, so you can't do much about the structure of the bridge itself. But what stops the government from, building a system around it in such a way that it doesn't get flooded? Because end of the day, it's a bridge and it has to serve its purpose, especially during monsoons, right? So these are some examples of designs that are so good, which have a lot of scope for improvement. Now, again, this being said, what do you think are the elements that go into a great design? So we spoke about the safety pin, we spoke about the DABBAWALAS, we saw some bad design. You shared some great design, which had some very interesting elements. Can a few of you list what are the elements that go into making a design wonderful and truly?
One is voice of customer.
Voice of customer, okay. Yes. Yes.
Empathy.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Yes.
Flexibility.
Flexibility. How would you say flexibility, sir?
Sir, further subject to further future challenges or further requirements, there should be some scope for improvisation.
Wonderful, sir. So it should be future focused as well.
Ideology.
Ideology, sir.
It's a low cost.
Ideology.
Low cost.
Ideology.
Okay, ideology. Low cost.
Idea.
Empathy.
Empathy. Yes. Yes.
Easy to use.
Ease of use. Brilliant. Brilliant. Intuitive in nature. Right? You'd see a lot of these elderly people at homes, right? My father is totally against technology. He doesn't use a smartphone. But I believe once when one of his friends showed him an Apple iPhone, he found it very intuitive and he found it interesting to use than the Nokia phone that I use. For the simple reason that he found the design to be very easy to use. So yes, usability is definitely a point. Cost is definitely a point. Very interesting points. So if you, based on what we discussed, again, based on some of the very true answers that you have shared, here are some interesting aspects of or elements of very good design. Everything, as ma'am and the gentleman said, is all based on empathy, right? You have to really feel for your end user, whether it's a product or a service or you're solving a particular problem as an NGO, or even as a teacher, as an academician, right? Empathizing with students. It is very, very essential that you empathize. So that's a fundamental bedrock. But over that, your product has to be simple. It has to have or offer awesome experience, right? As I said, the iPhone, right? It should be frictionless. Basically, there shouldn't be any area where it doesn't fit the environment. It doesn't challenge the user. It should be easy. It should be efficient, right? It shouldn't be a synthetic peg in a round hole that kind of actually puts things in a different tangent. It should reduce complexity, right? So that's one critical requirement. And above all, great design should should question assumptions. It should not go by what is seen. Again, going back to that Nepal story, data says that children die in hospital. But these students who are interested in actually getting deeper into the matter question that assumption, right? They listen, they observe, and they question the assumption that, hey, these unfortunate children did not die in the hospital. They died en route to the hospital. So the government and the medical leadership, please note that the problem isn't in the hospital. There are certain problems, but this particular issue is on the way to the hospital. So they question, right? For example, let me give you another example. When you're talking of questioning assumptions, we all assume that when we go to a restaurant, right? A restaurant should have a menu. The moment you sit down at the table, right? The bearer, the waiter comes with a menu card and gives you the card and says, sir, this is what we have to offer. Why should it be so? Why can't the menu be designed on the spot? So the chef says, sir, these are the vegetables we have today, the ingredients that we have today, and we have some mutton and chicken and so on. What would you like to have? So you actually can tell them on the spot that, hey, I would like to have palak paneer, or I would like to have a mutton biryani, something like that. So you don't have to have them. Again, why should a restaurant actually charge you for the food you eat, right? Why can't a restaurant say, you just stay here, we have an awesome ambience, you can spend 3, 4, 5 hours just like a picnic here. Certain items of the food that you see on the buffet are free. It comes as a part of the package. You're also free to bring your own food from home. We give you just have to pay for the ambience and for the space you use. You can always question assumptions, right? So that is another fundamental element of a wonderful design. Don't go by what is said. Keep questioning. Right? There are so many tools, right? We have the very popular 5Y tool by Toyota, right? Who gets the tool basically takes you deeper and deeper and deeper into why a certain problem exists, right? So it's all about that. So if you are designing a solution, typically a curriculum for your student, these would be the things that you would have to keep in mind. Empathize with the student, especially in today's scenario where, we are all challenged by the devices that we have. Not every student in school could afford to have a laptop, right? Not every family can afford to have multiple laptops at home, right? So children and parents who work are challenged by this. The solutions that you offer should be simple. The experience should be rich. There should be a lot of engagement, especially with students, frictionless, efficient, and reduce complexity. So these are the key aspects or key elements of any wonderful design, right? So what all can we design? And this is a question actually you all answered almost at the outset, at the very beginning, right? You came up with many things. You said it can be both man-made and it can be natural, right? So you kind of already summed it up saying that, yes, you can design almost everything from your very life itself. So if you decide that this is what I want to be 10 years from now, we make a very conscious choice, we work towards that. Yes, you have designed your life. Whatever you would like to aspire for, what would you like to achieve? So everything and everything can be designed. Now, let me try to share a few examples with a few very popular design approaches. So that will kind of help you marry the example with the approach. So it will give you a better understanding. Let us take a human concept, something that we created, like religion, like Sikhism. Okay, a wonderful religion, right? It's a religion I believe that gives supreme importance to knowledge in the form of the Granth Sahib, right? It has a very integrated community. They follow certain codes, certain patterns like the 5Ks and so on. But if you look at this, there was a very real need for it. So if you want to give this particular religion, or rather kind of portray this religion into a particular design aspect or design approach, I think this will kind of very closely tie to this definition of design thinking, which has been popularly articulated by this organization called IDEO, which was under the Stanford University. Now, if you look at this particular design model, there are 3 key aspects to it. There's a human desirability or an inspiration. There is a viability, right, or an implementation aspect to it. And there is a feasibility or the ideation aspect to it. The concurrence of all these 3 together creates the awesome experience, right? Now look at it from the aspect of Sikhism. There has been a need for a certain group of people to come together due to the political requirements of those days, right? And it was doable because the Sikh gurus who designed this they were able to create a cohesiveness among the people by the way they named them. They call all the men Sikhs and they call all the women Kaurs. They had the 5 Ks, right? So by which they identify themselves, the brand that they create. And yes, they had a process and a way in which they could all bring this together, right? There was a feasibility in which this was done. Let me give you a more technology example. We are a country that's blessed with a lot of sunlight, right? Whether even during monsoon, it's actually pretty hot outside here in Chennai, right? We are blessed with a lot of sun. If that be the case, and additionally, if there is a problem of electricity bills, right? So the government is not able to create enough electricity to, supply to all the remote villages across the country to meet high industrial requirements and so on. Why don't people use solar energy? If you land over any city, right? You're approaching the airport, and when you're closer down homes, you'll notice that most apartments, hardly few, if any, hardly have any solar panels on them. Why is that? Because in today's situation, today's scenario, implementing a solar technology, right, panels and all the systems that go along with it, seems to be a bit cost prohibitive, right? There is a need for it. It can be done, but the cost aspect or the business aspect of it is huge, right? So we as a country are probably not yet ready into getting into solar energy. So this is one example of where human requirement, business viability, and the feasibility of doing it from a technological perspective, when these three come together, offer an awesome experience. Let us look at another example. Language, right? Devanagari script. Since most of you are North Indians, people who speak, even when it comes to South India, typically any Indian language has a brilliant structure in which they are all associated or related to in terms of the sounds. And I'm sure all of you are very familiar with the chart that you're seeing before yourself, right? Now, India, I assume, is the only country which has been able to put this together. And of course, all other countries which have a similar language system, right? What basically happened here is they were able to codify language, which makes it very, very repeatable, easy to understand, and thus easy to propagate, right? Why is it that children very early in their life, right, very young years, are able to catch a language very easily? It's basically because they tend to have one of these tools in school that they use for children to learn, right? This is a very good example for the second model that I would like to share with you of design thinking. This is a model that was propagated by a very famous design thinker called Roger Martin. And he first brought it out in his book called The Design of Business. Now, what does this gentleman say? He says that initially, any problem that you have, right, like language, for instance, when it was in its infancy years, right, was a mystery. But over a period of time, as you continuously mull over the problem, or you continue to use the language and develop it, you start noticing certain patterns, right? Certain associations or affinities, right? Which we tend to call heuristics here in this language. So mystery, when studied deeper and deeper, tends to create patterns. And these patterns, when you understand what are the good patterns, what are the bad patterns that do not work out, when these are mulled over, thought over, and done further research on, they tend to create what you call algorithm or codification of a particular solution, which helps in the repeatability of it. Now, let me ask you a question. You are all teachers. You are the people who create and share knowledge. What profession? Heuristic profession, or is it an algorithm profession? If one of you, suppose, moves out to another institution, to another university or a college to replace you, would that student who or the teacher who replaces you be able to as effectively teach as you have? Of course, you all have textbooks, you all have curriculums, you all have blackboards, you all have laptops and digital devices now. So in terms of sharing technology, yes, but not all effective. I still remember when I was a school student and in college, history was one of the subjects I hated. And when I joined college, I did political science along with history and economics. And I found that the professor there who taught history recreated history before our eyes. And the same goes to my professors at Madras University where defense studies. When we spoke about warfare, he actually created a landscape before me. So when we speak of the first battle of Panipat, the second battle of Panipat, it wasn't just numbers and dates and odd sounding names, right? It was actually people coming together on the blackboard. It is the way the particular faculty member renders the subject. It can be something as standard as mathematics or engineering, or as creative as performing arts or dance or music, right? So just a question for you all.
It is heuristic.
It is heuristic. I tend to be
It is heuristic because algorithm will not work, all the time. Every time you cannot go for the same pattern, same method, same process.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there are some professions, for example, like a salesman, right? There are some salesmen who sell the same product much more efficiently than his or her colleague who sell the same product, but not that as much. They are not able to meet their half yearly or annual goals. So you're absolutely right. So it's more of a heuristic. Certain people have it in them, certain people do not. Let's move on to a third example and yet another definition of design thinking. South Indian food, right? Idli, dosa, vada, like how all our North Indian friends and across the India say. But there is a wonderful, wonderful example of design thinking in this. And if you could connect to the second slide that I shared, listening, dialoguing, and observation, this beautiful recipe or this, offering food that you see on your screen here, and to certain important aspects of that. What actually happened was, South Indian food or, the creation of idlis and dosas existed much, much, much more before then refrigerators came into our house, right? So how do you think women who used to grind flour, right, make the dough for the batter for idlis and dosas and vadas, do this? They obviously could not do it on a day-to-day basis because earlier days people largely lived in joint families, right? Even today, if you go to rural areas, go to small towns, you'll see multiple families staying together under one roof. It's almost impossible for women to do that. On one side, they have to take care of the kids, maintain the homes, prepare food. I mean, it's hectic, right? And if you want these women to also shine in art forms like Bharatanatyam and Carnatic music and study and all that, I mean, you need to give them some time off the kitchen, right? So in those days, before the advent of the refrigerator, people thought that, hey, you know what? When we prepare dough, it's fresh and awesome on the very first day, right? So why don't we design a menu which goes as per the quality of the food degradation or the decomposition process, basically when dough ferments, right? So on the first day, you make awesome idlis, fresh batter, tastes good. On the second day, when the dough is slightly more fermented, again, because down south, shiny Tamil Nadu, it's always hot, so food tends to ferment a little bit faster, right? You have crispy dosas, which has that slight tang of sourness from it. The third day, you make vadas, crispy good vadas, deep fried in oil. And on the fourth days, you have a concept called uttapam, right? Which is similar to a dosa, but thick, garnished with a lot of onions and tomatoes and chilies. And to go with all this, not to make it boring, because every day you have dough in one form or the other, you have these awesome chutneys, right? Sauces. You have coconut chutney, pudina chutney, chili, tomato. You have sambar to add to your intake of proteins, vegetables, so on and so forth. So the entire aspect of food was designed keeping in mind certain unstated requirements of the users. This takes me, I would like to take you to yet another aspect of our approach of design thinking, definition 3, as we say, which is indigenous. So this was designed at Intellect, the association the institution that we are associated with, the School of Design Thinking. And what does it basically say? There are requirements which are both stated and unstated, right? We know that food will go sour, but we don't know that women also need time in their hands, to pursue other things. They cannot be kept in the kitchen, grinding flour, making the batter day in and day out to serve the large number of family members. So what we tend to do is we tend to observe patterns. We tend to observe anti-patterns. Patterns are, yes, you can create a variety, multiple types of menus. The anti-pattern is that your dough has only that much shelf life before it turns sour. So we start connecting the dots. We start connecting the dots within and outside. We look at other places for inspiration when we're trying to connect dots. A wonderful example for this, slightly out of the current example, is this hallowed institution in South India called Arvind Eye Care. Now, what does Arvind Eye Care do? It's basically an eye hospital. And the founder's dream was to make eye treatment affordable to everybody, even in the deepest, remotest of village where people cannot, afford expensive eye care. So his thought was, when most eye problems can actually be treatable, can be curable, why do people go blind? Is it just because of money? And so he thought, okay, when I am able to bring down the cost due to scaling up the operations, right? The more the requirement, the lesser the cost of each unit. He started looking at various sources for ideas. And when he roped in consultants and other medical practitioners in the field, most people said, sir, why don't you look at Apollo Hospital? Why don't you look at the government hospital? Why don't you look here? There? Everything associated. But do you know where this gentleman actually looked at for his inspiration? Anybody? Can anybody take a wild guess? He flew all
McDonald's.
Absolutely spot on, sir. Spot on. He flew all the way to the United States, studied McDonald's, because McDonald's, they have championed the cause of repeatability of algorithm. The example, that the model that you just saw before, wherein they are able to repeat the same thing again and again and again. You go to any McDonald's in India, across the world, the quality of the bun, the quality of the patty, the quality of the lettuce, the procedure, everything is the same. It's algorithmized, codified to such an extent that it is the same experience that you get. And this gentleman did just exactly that. He took his inspiration outside the box, into food industry, right? And finally, one important aspect, again, going back to the third element on slide 2, right? Observing. Key aspect is you are not blind spots, basically, which is I don't know what I don't know. If you know what you don't know, it's not a blind spot. But there are certain things that you do not know that you do not know. And unearthing that is extremely important. It's the basic fundamental issue that needs to be resolved before you even come up with prototypes or any other models.
Excuse me, sir. Can we correlate it with the Johari window?
Absolutely, sir. Sure. Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Right. So that being said, design thinking has 3 fundamental laws. Okay. The first law is that less is more. Not always do you have to have a solution that offers more and more and more and more and more. Take, for example, another popular technology story, right? During the 1990s and early 2000s, when BlackBerry was thinking of adding yet another key to help those professionals who compose emails on their phones, right? To send that email with just click of one button. On the other side of the spectrum, there was a gentleman called Steve Jobs who said, why do I need so many keys on my phone? I just need one key, right? And everything inside that is an app based on the requirement of the user. People can add app or delete apps as per their requirement. But in terms of the key, there is just one key on the phone. So you actually do not need to give more. A really good design is clutter-free, right? It talks of only what is the most important. So rule number 1 is less equals more. Number 2, last 2% equals 200% of your effort. Let me give an example again. You go into this really plush hotel, okay, a really good hotel. What do you expect to happen? You go there to the counter, to the concierge, to the receptionist, and you say, yes, I have a room booked here. This is my name. You give them your card. You undergo the process for say 10-15 minutes, and your luggage is taken to your room, and you go into your room. Great experience. We're all very happy with it. Change the situation, okay? Again, the same experience, but see how the outcome is now. You again walk into a wonderful hotel like the Ritz-Carlton probably, and you check in, you're very tired, long flight, you're all sweaty, stuffy, and you are desperate for a coffee and a warm shower or a cold shower, right? And then the person at the counter sees you, he knows you, okay, he says, okay, sir, this is your name, this is your room, it's booked. Why don't you go to your room? We'll send you a hot cup of coffee. In fact, hey, you know what? I know you stayed with us the last time. I know you like this particular type of coffee. We'll get that served to you. Relax. We can do the paperwork probably after an hour or so. No problem, sir. He calls the bellboy and helps you take you to your room. Right? Now, isn't that wonderful? It's just that small 2% saying that, I know, sir, you have been with us before. Go into your room, no problem. We'll take care of the paperwork later. So that last 2% is what wows you, saying, okay, I know I'm going to spend probably 2,000 rupees more in this hotel, right, for my accommodation. But you know what? I love this experience. So I don't mind the money. I want this. So that's where it is. And especially when you're a product company or a services company, it's that last 2% that matters, that finish of offering your service, which actually matters. The next one is the theory of prioritization, right? Theory of prioritization is not always linear. Most often than not, it's exponential, right? 10 gram, 100 gram, 1,000, it's always to the power 10. What today might seem as a trivial issue may not be a trivial issue. It can always jump up 10 times. So it's very important to prioritize what you require, right? If you have 10 sets of issues that you need to resolve, it isn't a good example to always, go with all the 10 or decide saying that, hey, you know what, this is first in my calendar list, or this came first to me, so I need to do that, even if it's a small 10 gram issue. There could be a 1,000 gram issue that will be looking at you 6 months down the line. But if it's important, it's important, and you need to prioritize what is the most important at this point in time. Okay, so what is design thinking at the end of the day, right? Design thinking is basically human-centered, because at the end of the day, it's all about your user. It's all about your end customer, right? If you go into the definition of design, it finally ends by saying based on human needs. So it's all about the person. As one of you rightly said, right? It has to be future focused. It has to be scalable, both in quantity and in time, right? You should be able to look at the future and decide what the requirement could be. At the end of the day, it has to create value. It has to be innovative. It has to create that delta, that difference in what is there in it vis-a-vis what other competitors are offering, right? So there is that big difference. So if your solution caters to these three, then you have a good, you are actually undergoing a good design thinking process. So that said, what is the difference? We talk about design thinking. What is the difference between design thinking vis-a-vis normal or traditional type of thinking, right? The normal type of thinking that we do. Again, it will be great if you can keep into your head the Nepal story that I shared at the very outset. Okay, traditional thinking is always about the answer. Those children were dying because they did not have incubators. Was that the right answer? Design thinking actually looks at it the other way. It's about asking the right questions. Did these children actually die at the hospital, or did they die elsewhere? What was the problem? It's always about questioning assumptions. It's always asking about the really right question. It's not always about the answer. You need to have the right question first. Traditional thinking is about more talking, people explaining, debating, discussing, and all that. Design thinking is about listening. Let the other person talk. He knows probably what his problem is. Most often than not, he may not. But let's listen. The more you listen, the more you learn. Data. Traditional thinking by the Nepalese government said that, so many children die because lack of incubator. There was data. But is it always about data? Not necessarily. It's about stories, right? Why? What happened to these children? What happened to their families? What happened en route to the hospital, right? Why? It's more about the stories that happen. It's not always about data. Data is definitely required. Data is mandatory. But sometimes there is a little more than just data, right? Data can be misinterpreted. And the true interpretation of data comes when you understand the story behind that data. Events. Traditional thinking talks about events. But in design thinking, it's always about experience, right? It's about the empathy. It's about the feeling of the person. They talk about facts. We talk about feelings, right? End of the day, it's always about the human being at the center. You remove that one element, the entire effort of design thinking, all that you put together across multiple years has come to a naught. It's always about the man in the center. So that is what design thinking is about. Now, at the outset, you would remember that I said that this particular session is about a very, very fundamental requirement. which is basically preparing the design mind. And why is it like that? It's because basically design thinking has two aspects to it. One is design the thinking, which is basically the design mind. And the other thing is thinking the design, or basically using the tools. If you do not have the right mindset, right, it would be nigh impossible to use the right tool, right? You need to condition the mind. Just as I said, to be a right doctor, to be an engineer, to be a teacher, to be an academician, you first need to have the right mindset. So true real design thinking comes in two phases. Phase one is the design mind, preparing the design mind. And the phase two is then the design thinking process. You might have a 4-pronged approach, you might have a 5-pronged approach, you might have multiple phases, multiple process framework. But first the design mind and then design framework. Now let us go to seeing what some of these aspects of the design mind are. Right? How do you work on preparing the design mind? We believe that there are 4 key aspects to it. Aspect number 1 is the design mind in itself, right? That's what we call design the thinking, right? Instantly, what I'm trying to show to you in this 1.5 hours gap is what we actually tend to do over a 3 very intense workshop, 3-day workshop. Sometimes it even goes to 4 days plus, right? So we have people come to our design center, and there are a lot of activities that we do. We probe into them, we question them. We try to first inculcate that mindset even before people start thinking about design. And I'll talk to you about that later at the very end of this presentation. The second thing is design space. And today, as we are speaking, this is very important because most of us tend to work from home. Imagine yourself back into in your college, in your classroom, right? In your institution, doing research, you're visiting laboratories, you're visiting libraries, right? But today, all that is not there. Here I am sitting in my bedroom, which doubles up as my study room, right? I'm trying to reach out to you people, sharing my experiences, my thoughts on design thinking, right? So design space is very important. And many times we find that this is not very conducive to do good work because space is very important. So when we talk of a design mind, design space, you need to have the right ambience to work. Imagine going to a temple or going to a mosque or going to a church, right? We pray from home. If prayer from home is good enough to meet our requirements to give us that peacefulness in mind, why do we have to go outside? Why do we have to go to a mosque or to a church or to a temple to pray? It's because of the ambience. It's because of the space that allows us to naturally get into that mindset, right? The third is design process, right? Now, at the School of Design Thinking, we have a 5-step process. I probably may not touch into that process right now because that is a totally different ballgame altogether. But there are different processes. For example, initially you saw the process by IDEO, you saw the approach by Roger Martin. So there are different processes which work for different people. And then there are different design frameworks or design patterns, basically models that tend to work, the repeatability part of it, the algorithmic part of it, which under given set conditions, under set parameters, they tend to work or support as a framework. And since this is replicable and usable again and again and again, it tends to become a framework that's easily usable or deployable when you're approaching. So these are the 4 very critical aspects while approaching design thinking: the design mind, the right design space, having a robust design process, and using the right design frameworks and tools and so on and so forth. Right? Now we are coming almost to the final part of this presentation. And I would actually say the most key aspect of it, because now I'm going to talk about the most important tool that you use for design thinking. Okay, and this tool is the human mind. Now there are certain observations that we have made, right, which we kind of call as the 13 musical notes. These are basically forces in your mind that tend to help you accelerate in your growth, or that kind of tend to pull you down or decelerate your growth. Okay, there are also certain aspects which you have to be wary of, which are good at the right quantity. It's like salt or like spice, right? Too much of it distorts the dish, too less of it and your dish is bland. You need it at the right amount, right? So let's get into the first set of what your of these forces are. We call it SEPIA. Okay, we call these the 5 drivers of design or for a design mindset. And I'll try to put this into context. The first is skill. Okay, The second aspect is expertise. The third is perspective. The fourth is idea, and the fifth is alignment. Now these 5 have been abbreviated, acronymized as SEPIA. Now, why is it? Let me give it to you from an academic perspective. Imagine a student who has just graduated from an engineering course, right? He joins an organization, a typical IT company, right? He comes down south to Bangalore, joins an IT company. So what does this young student bring with him, right? This fresh new IT employee. He brings a skill. This young boy or girl has the skill of Java coding. He knows some languages. He has a certain knowledge packet, as we say, right? So he brings that level of knowledge with him of a certain language. Now, repeatedly using that, right, that skill, he tends to gain expertise. Or another example, a new doctor, right? A surgeon who does an operation for the very first time has skill, but he becomes an expert surgeon after having done that operation again and again and again and again and again, right? It's like this example that one of my colleagues at the School of Design Thinking often likes to say. He quotes Bruce Lee often. Bruce Lee once, it seems very interestingly, said that he's not afraid of the opponent who knows 10,000 types of kicks. He's afraid of the opponent who does one kick 10,000 times or practices it 10,000 times to get that expertise. So what does it essentially mean here? That repeated application of skill gives you an expertise, right? It makes you a master of that particular thing. And when you're an expert, right, along with a lot of experience and knowledge, you gain a perspective. So you tend to get ideas of, how you can solve a particular issue from various angles. And that gives you idea, right? Because you are now over and up. You look at a problem from probably a heightened position, like from 30,000 foot above. So you get a complete picture of the landscape. Take, for example, let me give Amazon as an example, okay? Now, if you look at Amazon, actually, since most of us buy our things from Amazon, I'm sure all of us do. What does Amazon basically do? Their idea is brilliant. It just basically connects 2 things. It connects the internet, and it connects this age-old concept of product catalog. Look, in countries like the United States, earlier you had this thing of product catalog that used to be mailed to you, to households, every week or every month, right? Saying that these are the new products from a particular brand. Would you like to buy them? They have these cards that are there in the catalog. You just fill it with the details. I need so many shirts or so many trousers or so on and so forth. You mail it to them, they send it, and then you exchange money. You give them money, right? Amazon brought that 2 together. They have the product catalog. That's a list of products that you see on their app or their website. And they enable this through internet. Awesome idea. So what used to happen by post and by a physical courier, a guy who used to come to your house and deliver things earlier, now happens over the internet. You make your order, you pay for your products that you buy, right? And it gets delivered at home. All done powered by the internet. And the end of this is complete alignment. And going back to the idea of the student who just joins an institution, joins an organization, after coming up to idea and, sharing his thoughts and so on, he is totally aligned to the higher purpose of what the organization is about, right? So that's when he becomes a true contributor. So he does not look at the fundamentals of delivering a particular product, coding, testing, and so on. He looks at the alignment. He looks at it from a strategic level. So these are the 5 drivers of growth. Let us look at another 5 forces which we need to be wary of. We call this decaf, and these are the 5 frictional forces. What are these? First, it's doubt. The second is conflict. The third is anger. The fourth is fear, and the 5th is ego. Okay. Now, that being said, I will not say all this is completely unnecessary. These are frictional forces. Imagine yourself in a car, okay? You're on the Gurgaon highway, okay? And you're traveling at 80, 90 kilometers per hour. And would it be possible if your tires are worn out, if there is no friction between or no good purchase between the tire and the road? What if the brakes don't work, right? So what I'm trying to drive at is these forces are to an extent necessary. It's like the pinch of salt that it need to kind of, embellish your soup. But excess of this and it ruins the dish altogether, right? Doubt typically comes when you kind of doubt yourself, when you are not sure of your own capabilities, right? And it comes from a lot of things. So you doubt your capability. If you are supposed suddenly promoted, right, and you are not sure of whether you are able to deliver the goods, there is a problem. But there's a way in which you can solve this. One is by seeking approval. The moment you get an approval saying that, okay, your guys have done a good job, right? It's good. We understand what you're saying. You have done a good work. That approval helps you to overcome that doubt. The second is conflict. And conflict need not always be because of ego. Conflict more often than not is because of difference in opinion, of perspective, of expectation within yourself. Imagine yourself to be in a project, right? You're working with your colleague. You have, and you both take your work very seriously, right? You have one opinion, your colleague has a different opinion. There is a conflict. So unless there is an understanding, it's very difficult to overcome this. So that's when you tend to dialogue and not debate, because as I go back to the second slide, it's about what is right and not who is right? So if you are in conflict, it's always good to sit down across a table, have a cup of coffee, and dialogue with your colleague or whoever is your stakeholder at that point in time, and overcome that conflict. The third thing is anger, and the source of anger is helplessness. Always, whatever the situation may be, whether it's professional or personal, right? Again, on a road, a guy comes, bam, hits your car from behind, right? We are angry. Why? Because we're helpless. We were careful that we don't hit the guy in front, but the guy behind came and hit me, and immediately we lose our cool, right? We become angry. Everything goes for a toss, right? How do you overcome anger? Acceptance. There are certain things that are kind of beyond our control, right? What's the point in venting your anger, venting your energy, wasting resources on something that you cannot control? It's not in your sphere of influence, right? Accept the situation and learn to move on. The fourth is fear. Why fear? Because typically we as professionals, right, we always have this fear of doing something wrong. We have this fear of failure. We have this fear of commitment. Oh my God, should I really commit to this 5-year project? Can I do that? I mean, there might be other things that, that will kind of probably inhibit my, working on the project. And there's always this fear of the unknown, right? Oops, there's this new boss coming into office. Okay, now I need to report to him or to her. How is that person going to be? Unknown. So fear. Obviously, if you have fear, the only way to overcome is to inculcate courage. Say, okay, let's see how things go on. Why should I be afraid? Okay, a failure, as they say, is a stepping stone to success, right? If I fail now, if I do something incorrect, I learn from it and I'll do it better the next time. So courage is the antidote to fear. And finally, ego. Ego is typically that fear that I know it not, that attitude, right? Whereas in one of the earlier organizations I worked for, I was very close to the HR department. And the senior HR over there, she told me that, Ram, it's not important that, always important that the resource that we get should have that particular skill. It's most important that that person, he or she, has the right attitude, the willingness to learn, the willingness to unlearn whatever that person would have learned. People with experience typically come with a lot of attitude. They say, like, I have 20 years of experience in this industry. I know it all. But sometimes it puts people in certain situations where they will kind of have to unlearn and relearn. Exactly what's happening today during the pandemic, right? We were all very used to a style of living, a style of working, a style of interacting with people till March 2020. Come April, everything went for a change. Everything changed. We had to adapt. So if I say I am awesome in conducting, in giving lectures in a physical hall before a set audience, I have to unlearn or kind of adapt myself to this new thing. Like, for example, right here, I only see my screen. I'm looking at the camera. I don't see anybody over here. How do I adapt to this new way of exchanging information, of disseminating whatever? So the first thing is be humble. Know that things change. Be like water. Again, a very popular statement by Bruce Lee. It's good to be like water. Go with the flow. Right. And now I would like to share 3 important aspects, which we call the 3 capacity levers, because it's very important to have these things, to overcome them, and yet to have it to a certain extent. The first thing is vulnerability. Imagine yourselves moving into a totally new location. I am here in sunny Chennai. I've been here for quite a long, and I know my neighborhood. I'm very happy here. People know me. I know people. Everything's hunky-dory. Now suddenly I am put into a place like Amritsar. Okay, I have now been to Punjab. right? I go to Amritsar, there are Sikhs everywhere. It's a different culture for me. It's different. The language is different. The food is different. The weather is different. It's totally different. I feel very vulnerable. But you know what? That's the best time when actually a person grows. When a person is put into a situation of vulnerability, he or she tends to grow because their thinking capacity grows that much. Unless I know certain keywords of Punjabi, right? I will not be able to interact with the ATAL-wala or with the local eatery over there. They will not understand my Tamil or my rudiments of Hindi, right? So I will need to spruce up my capability, and that will make me think in 10 different ways, right? So vulnerability is a very, very important capacity lever. The second thing is appreciation. Oh, we all need appreciation, right? When we join a new company, right? We get into a new organization with a decent hike in our salary. Research shows that people get stale of that salary at the end of the second or the third month. They know that's the money they're going to get. The first month they've said, see, oh, it's nice. But third month, fourth month down the line, okay, I know this is my salary. Okay. But what really keeps the people kicking and excited is the appreciation they receive from everybody. It might be from your peers, it might be from your seniors, it might be from people below. One good word of appreciation, one smile at the right time, a very specific appreciation saying that, hey, so-and-so, you know what? I like the way you delivered that lecture. Or I like the way you handle that class. Or, you know, I noticed this particular feature of yours, a capability of yours, and I think it's really nice. So I appreciate it. I like the way you articulate, or you share notes with students, so on and so forth. So that is what keeps people up and motivated. Appreciation from all sides. And on the other side, also appreciate other people, because when you appreciate others, it expands your mind. It broadens your perspective. It makes you tend to look at the good things of people than the bad things of people. Right? Because appreciation is always about positives. And finally, and just to say, this kind of tends to, as I said, expand your capacity, or builds your capacity 10 times over, because people notice you in the positive way. And finally, it's about limiting beliefs, right? Again, kind of similar to vulnerability, but not exactly vulnerability. It's that feeling saying that, oops, am I capable of doing this? Right? Till yesterday, I was doing research. I was able to, present my paper in a seminar at a conference. Yes, that's all good. But today now, whoa, I have to handle about a 50, 60 strong class of 20+ year olds, right? Students who are doing their master's degree, many of them very erudite scholars themselves. Am I really capable of handling this class? Right? For me, this thought right now when I opened the session at 9 o'clock was, wow, I have so many academicians and research scholars before me, people who are much more experienced than I am. How am I going to convey all this to you all, right? So that was my limiting belief. And if I had stuck to that limiting belief, I probably would not have been able to speak as much as I'm speaking now, right? Nor would that faculty member or that teacher be able to deliver his or her lesson properly in class if they are intimidated by that limiting belief. And what does this typically do? It does just the opposite of appreciation. It kills your capacity 10 times over. So it is imperative that people overcome their limiting beliefs. So just to sum up, the design mind has 13 forces, or three sets of forces, or 13 musical notes, as we say, 10 plus 10 plus 3. The first 3 are the powers of growth, which you have to nurture and grow. And over a period of time, if everything goes right, it does grow by itself. So from skill, you come to total alignment, looking at things from a higher perspective. The second set are forces that pull you down. It's good to have them to a very certain minimal extent, because being totally decaf free, right, free of all those frictional forces is near impossible. It's good to have it to a certain extent, but then not too much. And be careful of these 3 capacity levers. You will be put into vulnerable positions, but it does help you think 10 times over. Appreciate and be appreciated. That's always what keeps people ticking. Limiting beliefs, the sooner you get out of it, the better. Otherwise, it sucks down your capabilities. Now, as I said at the outset, at the very last slide of my presentation, we as the School of Design Thinking actually conduct all that I just said over a period of 3 to 4 days, and we cater to multiple segments of the society. We work with corporations and entrepreneurs and startups on one side. We work with the social sector, with NGOs in whatever they do, and help them understanding design thinking and leveraging design thinking. We work with governments, right? We work with, for example, very recently we worked with the Tamil Nadu Industries Board, right? In how to improve Tamil Nadu in calling people, entrepreneurs to set up factories and workshops in the state. And we also work with academicians like you. We conduct faculty development programs. We conduct special courses for students who have entrepreneurial ideas, right? With a session that we call I Innovate. We have credit courses. So many times engineering colleges, especially, they would like to take design thinking as a part of their regular course, not just a one-off webinar or something like that, but a typical credit course where students are offered 3 or 4 credits based on the intensity of the workshop. And typically in these workshops, we teach them various aspects of design thinking. We give them various tools of design thinking. We give them projects that they have to solve by themselves and as groups. So it nurtures the culture or the mindset of a design thinker right at the student stage. For governments, we do a lot of, as I said, workshops and so on and so forth based on the requirement. We had a recent session with NIC, National Informatics Center. We work with Indian Oil Corporation. We are reaching out to various government universities. We are looking at reaching out to the Defense Ministry now going forward. So there are multiple sectors that we do. We have changed our model of engagement right now to the online mode, as Dr. Bhupender sir was saying at the outset, because of the limitations that we have. But going forward, most of our interactions, in fact, I would say all our interactions are always face-to-face. We have a 30,000-foot design center called AT12. That is the coordinate of where the design school is in Chennai. That's the longitude and latitude where the building is situated. And we have these workshops, walkthroughs. We have a lot of tools that we use. So, ladies and gentlemen, that kind of sums up my presentation or introduction to preparing the design for today. Thank you. Any questions?
Any question?
I am sorry, sir. I do not hear you clearly. Probably stop sharing.
Any questions? A new one? Any participant want to ask? If anyone wants to ask questions, mute yourself.
I hope I was clear enough. And,
Dr. Rama, I would like to thank you for the wonderful presentation. It was so much thought-provoking. There's so much crystal clear each and every concept that we all are spellbound, that we are not able to ask any question because there's so many things which you have taught us. And definitely we would look forward to work upon those things. And if possible, we would like to have your handouts for the further reference and your permission to trouble you in future when we are preparing our design section.
Absolutely. Anytime. You're always